Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Learn at Lunch webinar. We will hear from Associate Extension Specialist Roger Saws as he discusses custom farm ranch rates from a recent survey of producers. If you have questions, you may ask them in the chat window. You may access this window by clicking the chat button at the bottom of the screen, and Roger will answer questions at the end of the presentation. We have additional farm management resources also available on the eFarm management page, and I will share the link to that in the chat window. Roger, I'll turn it over to you now.
Okay, thanks a lot, Brent. I really appreciate the opportunity to join the Ag Finance webinars over the lunch hour. And thanks for all of you for joining us this afternoon. And hopefully you can pick up a few things to pass along to your ag producers and friends and relatives and neighbors and whatever when it comes to the custom rate situation here in Oklahoma, as well as some machinery management considerations related to those custom rates. And so with today's talk, I plan to review essentially how we got those numbers in the first place, and some highlights from those responses, some of the pros and cons of custom work, how to use our findings as a guide, and hopefully it'll help you determine what could or should be paid for services that others provide. And then finally, determining and comparing cost. And it's a very important aspect and principle, I think, in farm management, especially these days. These machinery costs are a major expense. They have been in the past, and certainly going forward, they continue to be a major expense. And, you know, knowing when to use a custom operator is one of the most important decisions I think that most of these ag producers can make. And in order to do that, you have to have a pretty good understanding of, you know, the surrounding market rates, and then also have a good feel and flavor of what those costs might be for operating that particular piece of equipment or machinery, or offering that service to your client. So I think that's some topics that we'll talk about today. And so let's proceed on with the show. Anyway, the custom rate survey was done last fall, and it contained about 180 plus operations, you know, field operations and services that we see around the state when it comes to production ag. OSU provided the survey content. USDA NAS assisted us with the mailings. And so their field office really did a nice job with that. And also they followed up with some phone calls to collect some additional information and data. We collected about 675 user surveys, or at least usable surveys, which did contain some good data. And so that allowed us to report about 75 operations. And so those operations are reported, and that custom report 205, or current report 205, custom farm and ranch custom rates, which is shown just like this. In case you're not really familiar with this particular publication, this is what that first page looks like. We've been doing this for a number of years now. And it's a very, I think, popular publication, as you might well understand. It just relates to so many different situations and scenarios out there in production agriculture. And so we released that last month. And so in case you haven't had a chance to look at it, please do so. And that link is shown down below. It's at the Extension Publications website at OSU. I did want to summarize and highlight some of the price declines and increases that we did see in our reports since 2 years ago. And I just wanted to highlight those that we had at least 20 responses for, not only this past go around, but also in 2019, the last prior survey, And if we had 20 responses to pass along in 2011, which was 10 years ago, I also included those in red. And so, for instance, with brush hogging, it went up about 14% versus 2 years ago, and then 10 years ago, it was about 40 and a quarter dollars per hour. And so you can see the overall trends and patterns, I guess, over the years with some of these operations. And you might ask yourself or ask me, well, does that mean that everything went up, in your publication? Well, not necessarily so. We did see some price declines also, and I wanted to report those here, in compared to 2 years ago, and not quite as many with 20 responses. But, truth be told, of that 75 operations that we had total to report, it was about a 50-50 split. I mean, there were some price increases and price declines really across the board. At least with those that we had a substantial amount of reports to pass along. You can see that that prior slide had more than what this one has. But anyway, it does sort of reflect some trends and patterns in production agriculture. And, you have to keep those market rates, I guess, that represent those custom rates as a guideline. And they represent all different kinds of scenarios and situations representative of production agriculture. It could be new and used machinery. It could be larger or smaller machinery that is performing that same operation. It may reflect the jobs done between neighbors and friends and relatives, which chances are those rates are lower than the surrounding market rates. And so, they represent so many different situations out there. And so we really encourage those that are looking at our reports. We're not trying to set the market, we are just reporting what we observed over the course of at least 2021. And you can use those rates as sort of as a guide. And I would really encourage those folks out there to use that as sort of a starting point in those negotiations. And you can adjust those numbers based on that particular situation between that custom operator and that potential client that they're working with. So I did want to move on to the situation of a base rate for harvesting small grains with, that extra charge for higher yields. Now, unfortunately, this year, I don't know how many situations we're going to be in with the higher yield standpoint. Hopefully, we'll see some 20 bushel wheat out there, certainly, and it will pay dividends still to harvest it if it's $10, certainly. But I certainly hope we get some rain that can help boost up these yields. But I did want to report that, that base rate is still right around $23.50 to $24 per acre. And then it's about 24 cents a bushel above 20 to 22 bushels per acre. So, those numbers in some form or fashion have changed over the years. And I wanted to show that on this slide, that at least since 2003, that base rate has in fact increased. Not a lot of a increase since 2013. But at least since 2003, we did experience I think it was about 78% in terms of an increase over those years, about 4% a year. And you can see how that surcharge or that extra charge per bushel essentially mirrored what that base rate is. And then the yield level hasn't changed a whole lot over the past, say, 20 years or so. And that's pretty comparable to what Kansas and Texas are also reporting in terms of that yield level where that extra charge kicks in. And then their base rates are pretty close to what ours are also. So I also wanted to show sort of a hypothetical situation where, if we had 40 bushel wheat, what would that custom harvest bill be over the course of that time series? And you can see how it's increased from just over $15 an acre all the way up to about $27 to $28 per acre, but it really hasn't changed a whole lot since about 2013. My suspicion is that these combines are so efficient and they're so, I mean, they're faster than what they've ever been. I mean, they've got huge headers, they have high capacities, we're able to cover a lot of real estate in a short period of time. And so I think a lot of these custom operators have been able to keep those costs down. Now, what does that bring? And what might we anticipate for 2022? I think that a number of these custom operators will be pressured to pass along some higher costs of doing business to their clientele. They would like to keep the lid down, I'm sure, and be very competitive on those rates, but sooner or later, they're going to have to pass along the higher prices of fuel. For instance, diesel fuel per gallon has increased about $2 a gallon, if not more, since the beginning of 2021. You know, that would be reason enough to push those rates up, but you know, everything else is also increased in terms of, you know, those costs. We have higher costs for labor. We have higher costs for that repair bill with parts and labor. And then we have the higher cost of ownership with new and used machinery. So we just have a lot of, I guess, input costs that are pressuring a number of these operators in the direction of having to pass along those higher costs along to the consumer. And so I wouldn't be surprised if we see some higher custom rates, not only for harvesting wheat, but maybe for the hang operations and all sorts of other field operations, as well as other services really across the board this year. Doesn't mean that it will happen. Every situation is different, but I think that they will certainly overall be inching up just because of those inflationary pressures. So we do have some custom work considerations when it comes to, you know, you think about hiring custom operators, and you think about, well, your own cost or machinery cost structure, all right, or at least what those potential costs could be. But there's a lot of other, I think, considerations that you really need to think about. You know, when it comes to hiring a custom operator, sometimes it's a slam dunk and it makes perfect sense. But other times you have to really think a little deeper into what's being involved. And so it's good to know some of those pros and cons. And so, for instance, the ownership costs can be avoided. So instead of having to pay for that expensive piece of machinery, you can free up that capital for some other use on your operation. Okay, that's beneficial for you. It does free up your time for other uses, and so you can spend your time and management for other aspects on your farm. And that operation may certainly benefit from a skilled operator that can perform that operation more efficiently and faster than what you can. A lot of these operators are very skilled, knowledgeable, experienced with those field operations and whatever services that they're providing. And so they do a really good job. I guess the big disadvantage, of course, when it comes to utilizing the custom operators is the timeliness or the convenience issue. And that's not getting the job done when it's really crunch time, because you're part of the waiting list and you're waiting in line when the wheat needs to be cut or when the hay needs to be put up. And of course, it's really stressful for everybody involved. And so that time is, you know, time is ticking on the clock, as well as it's costing money, because that's the optimal time to get that job done. The reliability operator might not be known if you know, they're new to the game, and rates might be, or may be, and many times they are excessive. You know, at those crunch time when you really need that job done, and you want you know, somebody to come on your place and get her done. You might have to pay a premium just to get her done. So there's other considerations when it comes to paying for that custom work. Be aware that when you hear about these custom rates from various publications or various sources, you know, they represent a wide variety of situations out there. And be aware that, you know, they also may have some assumptions built into those numbers. So when you hear about these numbers at the coffee shop, or you read about it in certain publications, be aware that they represent certain assumptions and they're collected in certain ways in those surveys. And so be sure that you're comparing apples to apples, because once again, there's a wide variation in rates due to the obviously competition. The custom work between friends, family, and neighbors are usually at reduced rates. And then of course there's various aspects of the soil conditions, the field sizes, shapes, of course the distance away from that custom operator's home base. And quite frankly, it is very easy to underestimate the full operation and ownership cost of a lot of this machinery and equipment. And so if you have a custom operator that, hasn't done their homework in terms of, estimating what their costs are, they might not be making as much money as what they think they are. And the same thing applies to those that own machinery, and then they think that they can perform certain operations cheaper than what the market is offering. If you don't know what your costs of production are, it's pure guesswork. You don't know if you're making a profit. And so I really encourage those folks out there, no matter if you're thinking about hiring work done or if you're actually in the business of performing that service, know what your costs of production are, know what those machinery costs are. The market for custom work usually does not cover all costs, because custom operators, many times they charge only for fuel and labor, and then rates tend to be quite low between friends, neighbors, and relatives. So when it comes to what should I charge for custom work, not only knowing what that overall market rate might be, as one piece of the puzzle, but I think a lot of these custom operators really need to know, once again, what their total costs are to help set up a custom rate. So they need to estimate what their operating costs are. Those are the costs that vary depending on the usage of that particular equipment or machine. I estimate that ownership cost and that annual fixed cost just doesn't change no matter how little or how much that machine is used. Okay, it's pretty well fixed and etched in stone. And so it's a good idea to refer to your own records. And this is another, I guess, sort of a soapbox or a lecture on the importance of using good production records and financial records, because it's going to help you figure your cost. Now, you'll need a sort of a format or ledger or a method to come up and how to figure those costs. And one of those is page 7 in our current report. But there's also other decision tools available, say from Kansas State, that really do a nice job. It's in a spreadsheet form. And so they can also help you calculate those costs. All right. So I did want to use our methodology, at least using page 7, and figuring how much it takes to own and operate a piece of machinery. And in this case, we're going to assume a used combine. And so I think that operator needs to really think about, first of all, getting their records together in terms of those fixed and variable costs, and also think about that annual use, what they anticipate using that machine for the upcoming season, or what they've done in the past. Also think about a profit and or risk margin in case they have a breakdown, and during those peak job performance hours where it's crunch time. And if you have a breakdown, man, that's really stressful for a lot of parties, and certainly for the operator, certainly for the customer, and for everyone involved. So, sometimes it's a good idea to at least think about compensating yourself for those situations where you might have a breakdown during those crunch times, and then tack on a markup over and above what your actual cost might be. Well, we'll figure those costs here just a moment. So first of all, we'll look at the ownership costs first. And so we're thinking about that capacity of that combine, We're thinking about how much did we invest in that combine, its approximate trade-in value, its asset life, and then it's, the taxes and insurance. And so we come up with a ownership cost on an annual basis of about $26,000 per year. And once again, that number doesn't change. If you keep it in the shed the entire season, that you're still subject to those ownership costs. But we are using this combine over 2,000 acres. And so we can spread that cost over those acres, and that amounts to just over $12 or $13 per acre. Then, of course, we need to think about the operating cost side of the ledger. Of course, that's your repairs, maintenance, the fuel cost, and of course the labor cost. And that tacks on, in this case, just over 15 bucks per acre, for a grand total of about $28 per acre. And so keep that number in mind as we go forward. I'm valuing labor here at about $20 an hour. And some of you may think, well, man, that's a pretty nice labor rate, right? But I'm valuing skilled labor, and that's pretty commensurate with, operating a combine. When you've got somebody in the catbird seat that's operating a combine that's could be a $500,000 machine, you want somebody that's skilled and experienced and very knowledgeable on how to run that machine, and they need to be paid for it. All right, so that's the reason why I've got, say, $20 an hour for that. The point being, though, is that no matter what you put in there for that labor rate, I think you need to be prepared to pay yourself something for your labor. All right. It's good business sense. I can get in my soapbox about that, but it's just a good business model, being able to pay yourself for that labor that you're spending and that time that's being spent with that particular service, with this particular business proposal. So I think another thing you really need to think about is tacking on a profit and risk margin. And so you might be asking, well, why would you want to consider that? Well, it really boils down to the complexity of the machine and the chance for breakdown at a very critical time. And so if you've got a spike tooth harrow and it's a light tillage type of equipment, if you have a breakdown, chances are you can fix it yourself in a short period of time. And so maybe the markup on that is pretty low, all right, because you just don't have much downside. Even if you have a repair to take care of, you can take care of it pretty fast at a, and quite frankly, a lot cheaper than what you can fix a combine. If you have a combine when it, that's broke down during peak harvest times, man, that's really stressful. And it's stressful because you have to have probably somebody to come out and diagnose the problem. Do we have parts for it? Maybe, maybe not. And so you have a potential of really some downtime when it comes to that particular operation. I think we need to be prepared to provide some compensation for those situations with a self-propelled machine that is very complex, very expensive to own and operate. So that's why that profit and risk margin is higher for those particular operations. And so if we were to tack on a 40% margin on top of that $28 with the cost calculation that we had in the prior slide, that's close to $40 an acre. Now, does that mean that we're going to get $40 an acre with a situation where we're harvesting 40 bushel wheat? Probably not, unless we're the only guy in Western Oklahoma that's doing some custom operations. It's really good to have that dollar number, though, in back of your mind when it comes to negotiation time, because chances are you would like to start out with a higher number, okay? And then, of course, your potential client is looking at, the market rates, and they're saying, well, the market rate is close to 28, and I think that's a good starting point. Maybe your starting point is higher than that. Well, hopefully you can come up with a zone of potential, agreement that's somewhere in the middle there somewhere, where it's certainly agreeable to that client, but it's also agreeable to you. You're covering your cost. It allows you to make a little bit of money on the side, and everybody's happy. Okay. I guess the other big principle when it comes to machinery cost management is to know what your break-even point is, and that's that's the situation where in our combine example, the break-even is 2,017 acres, and that represents really the amount of use needed to justify ownership. Think of it this way, there's a difference between what's being charged and your actual variable cost, and that actual variable cost in this case being $15.17 per acre. So that difference there is about $12.76. And so you can apply that income towards, and for each acre, towards paying for that annual fixed cost, which is your ownership cost. And it takes about 2,000 plus acres to do that. All right. So that's a good number to keep in mind in terms of just the overall annual usage of that machine to justify ownership. Now, you have some situations where it begs the question, what's the additional cost to own a combine if you use it, less acres? And so say you've got a farmer that they're willing to harvest their own acres only. They have a combine, they're perfectly happy to do that. They have 1,500 acres and they're willing to accept a higher cost of ownership for the ability to harvest when that crop is ready. So they're willing to pay a little extra for that peace of mind, for that timeliness and convenience issue that we talked about earlier. Instead of having to wait for that possibility of a custom operator to show up on the place, they can take care of it themselves. All right. They know that there's an added cost to that, but they're perfectly happy to do that. So in this case, it's really useful though to know exactly what that cost is, all right, in dollars and cents. So, their harvest bill would have been about $42,000. Their actual cost for ownership and operating that combine is closer to $49,000. And so that added cost per year versus what they would have paid is about $7,300 per year. You're spreading that over 1,500 acres, and so that's about $5 per acre. It's $4.86. And so you can think of that as sort of a price of insurance to get the job done on time. Now, is that something that they're willing to live with? Maybe, maybe not, but it's something that they really need to think about, when it comes to using certain pieces of equipment and machinery, maybe less than what that break-even point is, all right? So it's something to think about. So really, in summary, I just wanted to pass along a few things to you, not only those going market rates, which is reported in our extension publication, but also estimating what those machinery costs are, because I think that in unison with those market rates, it's really useful to know what those machinery costs are, because it gives you a sort of a groundwork or a benchmark of what your own situation entails. So in terms of, those potential clients, in terms of what should I pay? Yes, they need to consider not only the market rates, but there's other intangibles involved with hiring that work done. We talked about the pros and cons of that. And so what should I charge, especially for those custom operators? Well, obviously they need to consider their own cost structure, the potential profit risk margin that they can at least figure and hopefully achieve. And they need to take into consideration other factors and other intangibles, such as, the traveling distance, the field conditions, the overall competition, so on and so forth. But, the bottom line also is they need to know their break-even point of ownership. And so the greater the volume, the greater the profit potential. So in our example, essentially anything over that 2,017 acre, pivot point means a pretty clear profit of $12.76. And that's the difference between the going market rate and what their own operating costs are. All right. So once again, there's a wide variation in rates charged for most jobs and for many reasons. Really important you do your homework. And so once again, I would encourage those to use those quotes that are in our publication. Use those quotes as a guide and as a starting point for those negotiations. And hopefully both parties will end up with something that will work for both. So with that, I really appreciate everybody stopping by and listening in to the latest and greatest on, that current report, and also the importance of knowing what your costs are when it comes to machinery. And the webinar survey is in the upper right-hand corner there. So please click on that, fill it out, let us know how we're doing with these webinars so we can do a good job, even better. And my contact information is available there also. I'll stick around for a minute or two if there's any questions, and if not, you've got my information there for future reference. So with that, once again, thanks for tuning in, and I'll turn it back over to Brent.
Thank you, Roger. Also to add on, so everyone, if anyone has questions, you can either type it in through the chat window, or you can unmute yourself now and ask questions that way. And also I shared a link to the survey that Roger mentioned in the chat window as well. So you can click on that to open up the survey. And as he said, we absolutely appreciate you filling those out for us.
I did want to share that that final little caption there. I'm sure that you had teachers in the past, especially in kindergarten or elementary school, like days like today where there's very little wind, there's sunshine, you're staring out the window and you're thinking, man, I'd rather be outside or any place other than being inside in the classroom. Well, I think sometimes the teacher did get that wrong, right? So keep that in mind. And also for those of you that missed out on the rains, and I hope and pray that you're up to bat pretty soon on that. And my dad always said, after a long drought, we're always one day closer to the next flood, right? And so I guess that's one way to look at it. So once again, thanks a lot, and have a good rest of the day.
Thanks again, Roger. I don't see any questions yet. I wanted to let everyone know we have our next webinar scheduled for May 10th at noon as well. And it will be 15 reasons Oklahoma producers should know about Oklahoma agriculture mediation. It will be at noon, and we hope you can join us then. So if there are no other questions, all in the webinar, and we'll see you on May 10th. Thanks everyone for joining us today.
Thanks again.